he, as a teenager, got involved in this group called the Culture League. And the Culture League was this set of artists who wanted to create a Jewish national identity at the meeting place of sort of folk art and children's art, which of course overlapped with abstraction and cubism, and just as Picasso and Braque were turning to African sort of two-dimensional geometric sculpture, these Jewish artists were seeking a similar kind of connection to Jewish tradition. They famously went on this expedition to old synagogues to look at, to do grave rubbings and look at old sort of pre-perspective kind of arts. But the other side of the Culture League, it was this abstraction, and it was Yiddish. So the idea is that the language of sort of this Jewish identity was going to be Yiddish and modern, and modernity in art. And if you think of that combination, the name that comes to mind is Chagall, and Chagall was linked to this. And so it was of this moment of sort of trying to find this vitality. My father then focused more on the theater, which was quite lively in Kiev, in theater, in sort of cabarets. There was a lot of very experimental work going on. And then he went to Moscow.
In his early years, he was involved in Jewish theater and non-Jewish theater?
As far as I know, he was involved, well, this is the complexity of my father. As far as I can say, he was only involved in non-Jewish theater, though he had, again, been involved in the Culture League. And I think there was what you might call a Jewish inflection to what he was doing and to his interests. But I don't know of any Jewish theater directly Jewish theater. Now, the only things I can think of is that he did write this book on Chagall. So he was obviously in the 20s, and he obviously closely followed Chagall, and so must have known what Chagall was doing in Vitebsk and things like that. So I'm sure he was alert to this, and he was involved with the Culture League. But in terms of any productions, my impression was more that he was involved in sort of this modernist, constructivist, experimental world than, but I should add, I don't really know what, other than knowing broadly about what Chagall was doing, what a Jewish modernist theater would have been in Russia at that time. The area that people are looking at a little bit with interest now is the next step where my father went, which was Berlin, where there was this cabaret world. And very, very recently people have been talking about the lineage from Goldfaden into cabaret, into Dada, and with this sort of crossing point in Berlin. And I am assuming that would have been the world that my father would have been part of. I know that to support himself in Berlin, part of what he was doing is making these sort of silk designs, and we actually have one of them, which are quite wonderful, but I don't know that. I'm sorry?
What were the silk designs?
It was like shawls, but that he would actually design, and I guess there was somebody who would make them for you. I don't know. I don't think of my father as weaving, but we actually have one of those. So he was like a hustling artist trying to find a way to make a living in Berlin in the very early 20s. And so he certainly would have had a toe in, a participation in that cabaret world, which drew from Yiddish theater, but it's this Venn diagram where it's also overlapping with and helping to invent Dada and sort of a broad theater. And I think that's probably a good way to think of my father up until the late 20s, he's in this Venn diagram overlap where the part of the Jewish or Yiddish theater he's interested in sees itself as part of a modernist world and as a sort of another voice in modernism, rather than being sort of a Jewish world as opposed to. It's sort of the Jewish inflection of a modernist constructivist voice, and very, very abstract, and abstraction back to the Kultur Lige as being a Jewish voice. And if you think about it, I mean, it's hardly new for me to say, but in this period in the early 20th century, the question of nationalism for Jews is really perplexing. What is your national identity? Is it Zionist? Is it Russian? Is it German? Is it American? Is it Jewish? But is it modernism? And these various levels of abstraction in which you find an identity. And I think that was very, very true for my father. His language, his physical spoken language in this period is Yiddish.